I watched this what, Saturday morning. For some reason, I've been doing a lot of like Saturday morning watches for the show, and it's just like it's an interesting way to start your Saturday. Of
Oh
like,
yeah. Well, I
you
watched it
know,
before bed last night, so that's an interesting, interesting nighttime viewing right before I go to sleep.
okay, what's the better like place and time to watch a movie? I feel like most people would say right before bed, but I'm kind of an advocate for a morning movie to start the day.
Honestly, I want more movie showtimes in the morning at theaters. So I'm an advocate for morning movies as well because I can do it and then I can get on the rest of my day. And I feel like I'm just more prone to be automatically sleepy when I'm on my couch at like
Hmm.
10 o'clock at night. And even if the movie's only an hour and a half and I push play, like if I get into a certain position on the couch, like it's a wrap. Like I'm not making it
Yeah.
through the movie. So if I can go to a movie at like 9 or 10 in the morning, sit in a nice recliner in the theater, like be out of the house, get my morning coffee and like get the day started with that, like that's an awesome experience for me.
Yeah. No, I love that. I usually do morning movies at home because there aren't a lot of theaters that offer like morning movie screenings or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think we should have like 9 a.m. screenings. I personally love like a Saturday or Sunday 11:30 or whatever it is kind of screening where you get to have like a bit of a morning, you go to the movie, and then you have like the rest of your day. If it's Saturday, then you have like the rest of your weekend, essentially, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, I love that. When there's sort of, you know, how new movies are like, oh, the release day is Friday, but really we're going to show a bunch of showtimes on Thursday and like get the extra box office numbers up. Those movies typically don't start till like 3, 5 p.m. And I'm like, I kind
Mhm.
of would rather wait till Friday because I know there's going to be like a 10 or an 11. And so even though I don't see it like the first available, I get to jump in and start my day with it the next day. And then just like, oh, yeah, the whole entire weekend is after that. And it feels great.
Yeah. I also don't mind a weekday 7 a.m. movie before starting the workday. You know, I think there's something kind of nice there.
I did that the other day too. I was up at like 7:30 and I was like, I got to finish this movie I was watching. Yeah, this is a great time for it. I'm awake. I can have
Yeah,
my coffee, hang out with the dog.
coffee and a movie. It's like it's a perfect pairing. I think we need to start the movement towards that.
We do. We got to buy a theater where we're willing to pay to staff it starting at 7 a.m. and just like serve coffee and croissants and breakfast stuff and get a whole
Yeah,
movement behind it.
let's get it going.
Make it
We're gonna
normal.
lead the charge there. Yeah, let's. I don't like the term normalize, but let's normalize morning movies.
We'll make an exception in this case.
In this case, we'll make an exception. ScreenAgers, that lovely voice that you're hearing, also advocating for morning movies, is the one and only Nick Sheist of Bad Movies We Love. And maybe you've heard him on some other shows, but he's joining us today to talk about a very essential movie, a movie that I am excited to talk about. We're going to be talking a little bit of French cinema today. We've got Titane lined up. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm trying to add my best French flourish to it. Um, but yeah, that's what we're going with. I'm going Titane. How do you pronounce this movie?
Well, of course, like there's part of me that wants to just go Titane, but it's not. Titan, I think, is the correct or close enough
Yeah,
pronunciation.
I'm sure native French speakers will hate the way that we're pronouncing it, but at least we're trying and we're not going full just obnoxious American Titane.
Yeah, we can do that if you want, but I don't think you want that.
Well, Nick, thank you again for joining. Like I said, I'm very excited to talk about this movie. But before we get into the movie, like I mentioned, you are joining us from the Bad Movies We Love podcast, which is a great show. I'm sure folks can tell by the title what the show is sort of about. But just in case there's anyone out there who has not listened, is not a fan, why don't you give us a just brief sort of intro into what it is that you do over there?
Well, thank you for inviting me on this show because, like I told you in our little preamble, I don't really get to talk about like really good movies that I like all that often. I do run a film club and we used to have those discussions once a week, and that was like filling that void, but we're not doing that once a week anymore, and that's structured a little bit differently. So having the opportunity to not just be a guest on a friend's show and to talk about a movie I love, but to talk about a movie that like I legitimately really love. This is probably my favorite movie of 21. So
Nice.
yeah, getting to watch it again was great. Getting to talk about it's going to be even better. But like you said, bad movies we love is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of people don't like to use the term guilty pleasures, and I don't feel guilty about watching the kinds of garbage that I enjoy. And you've been on that show. We talked about Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. So it's a lot of movies like that where critics are generally going to say that it's bad, and its numbers, if you're to look at the tail of the tape with ratings, is probably going to be in the 50 to 60 out of 100 range and below. But they have some redeeming quality or some just undeniable entertainment factor that makes them watchable and makes them lovable. And a lot of these movies are ones that are from like the 80s and 90s that were sort of essential films in people's childhoods,
Yeah.
which I think is an interesting angle to how it shapes a movie watcher in the future, to look back at a movie that you loved as a kid and then see it 20, 30 years later and really have to dissect like whether or not you liked it, and if you still do, what was it that you saw in it as a child that really made it stick with you throughout the years. And that's a really fun discovery process, because most of what I enjoy about the show, besides like watching just like ridiculous movies a lot of the time, is talking to people about these movies, because I feel like no matter how maybe snobby of a cinephile you may be, there's some garbage in there somewhere that you like. And I know that everybody has those skeletons in their closet, and I want to know what those skeletons are. And I want to have a place where we can get together and we can bring the skeletons out and talk about them in a way that isn't about shaming the movies or about making you feel bad for liking something that is regarded as terrible. It's really about getting to the root and to the foundation of what it is you loved about that movie. And I've had a lot of fun with it over like 4 seasons now.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. The show is like really great. It's awesome hearing a bunch of different people come on and like you said, talk about movies that sometimes might be, from their childhood. As we all know, nostalgia is the strongest drug out there. So like,
Yeah.
a lot of times we're revisiting movies that we enjoyed as kids that maybe you rewatch it as an adult and you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't that great. Or you rewatch it and you're like, yeah, this still kicks ass. Or, there are just other sort of like guilty pleasures that we find along the way. And it's a good reminder that like as cinephiles, film fans, people who talk, write, make movies, whatever it may be, that like we don't have to take all of this so seriously. Yes, it is nice to take it seriously
100%.
because it is an art form that can contribute to us culturally and in all of those other ways. But also sometimes it's kind of entertaining and or it can be both. Like there's no reason to like separate the two. So movie fandom, film fandom, uh, being a cinephile, it can be a sort of like multifaceted kind of game. And I feel like between the two shows, we're exploring sort of like different avenues into what is like essentially the same thing, which is just like a celebration for this medium that speaks to us so deeply. We're just sort of attacking it from different angles. So,
Yeah, I
like I
mean,
said, I appreciate the show.
oh, I mean, I've been listening to your show lately too, and sort of like I got like a little different variety of like episodes where you actually talk about movies, some of the announcement episodes, some of the discovery process episodes. I was listening to this morning the 2024 like potential candidates to be included in the canon in the future. That was a fun one, and you saw a lot of sort of energy like pointing in similar directions, which I think is cool for all the guests that you brought on, because there is an understanding of what makes something essential, right?
Mhm.
And the movies that I cover, I mean, you could take them or leave them a lot of the time, but these are essential to individuals on a much more micro scale. Like this movie is
Yeah.
essential to the way that this person perceives movies, or maybe it developed their sense of humor, or maybe this set the tone for the amount of gore somebody can handle in a film. And I think it's really interesting to just like get into those conversations. And I did an episode on Wolf Cop 2, another Wolf Cop.
Yeah.
And this is like a very vulgar movie with werewolf sex. And as ridiculous as that movie is, my buddy Newman from Movies for Days, who was on the show with me, we ended up having like a very philosophical conversation about the nature of like beast existing within man, and the struggle of being sort of an animal trapped in a human body, and like how werewolf movies sort of begin to grapple with the notion of that, and some sort of tackle the philosophy better than others. And like, yeah, this is not necessarily a conversation that should be attached to another Wolf Cop, but it is something that I think is just inherent in the ideology behind making a werewolf story. So you and I talked about geopolitics while talking about Tokyo Drift. Like, the conversations really get into some interesting turf just because of the fact that we're gloves off, we're ready to get into everything that the movie has to offer, and we're not like punching down, where I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
movies that talk, or a lot of shows that invest in like bad movie culture are like, hey, we're here to talk about how bad this is and why it sucks. And it's like, that's not what I do.
Yeah, that's not fun. That's
Mm.
it's I don't find it that fun to just like tear down movies. I think it's really interesting what you were saying about like the micro versus macro, where you're talking about movies that are essential to like individuals, sort of like deep in their core. And sometimes with conversations that we have on this show, it does end up being a movie that is, or like a guest is paired with a movie that is very deeply connected to who they are as like a person or a film fan. And other times it's just like, okay, why is this movie considered something that like we can't tell the history or like the story of cinema without? But
Yeah.
then it gets kind of cool when we get to like marry those two. um Again, just like another sort of, I think, interesting through line between the two shows is that it's really all about like celebrating the medium, no matter like whether it's another Wolf Cop or if it's a crazy French film from 2021 that might live on as like the best movie from that year. We're still not even like 5 years removed, so
Yeah.
it's like hard to tell. But um, I do think that this movie was like rightly voted onto this list.
Well, I'm glad that you put that into the universe, that it may end up becoming the movie of 2021, maybe like 15, 20 years down the line.
Yeah, I mean, 2021 was an interesting year for movies, and I'm sure we'll get into like that conversation too. And I can't remember now, but like I'm trying to think what won Best Picture, because it's always interesting to like, this didn't get like Oscar love, and I don't think it
No.
topped a lot of like best of lists. It kind of had like mixed reviews. I feel like it was like mostly positive, but there were definitely some people who had a very strong negative reaction to this movie. But I do think, like a lot of other movies in the canon, like this one has legs. um we just haven't fully seen the extent to which like those legs will go, because we are still you know not that far removed from when it was first released. And I think 2021 is the last year that we have voted on movies for the canon, so like this
Hmm.
is like the most recent entry that we
Oh,
have.
awesome. Love to hear that. I mean, this was the Palme d'Or winner that year, but like kind of the way, the Oscars operate, it's like the year after. It's a little hard to track sometimes when you start to get too far away, but it
Yeah.
didn't get nominated for any Oscars, even though Julia won. No, she was nominated for the BAFTA for director, and then it won the Palme d'Or the year before. So it won in 21 when it did the festival circuit, but then the
Mhm.
BAFTA was in 22, so it might be one of those where it might be qualified as a 2022 film.
I I want to pull up what else came out in 2021 just to get a sense of like what other movies could potentially have like come out of this year. Okay, so we've got Dune, we've got Licorice Pizza, which that was probably my favorite movie of that year.
Mm.
But then you've got a lot of just like really like sort of like, you know, middling stuff. Not too much else that has legs. You have like Pig with Nicolas Cage. You've got
I
The
do
Worst
love that
Person in the
movie.
World. Those were all pretty good movies. You've got that horrendous Adam McKay movie, Don't Look Up. You've got the what I thought was a pretty bad Spider-Man movie in No Way Home. So yeah, there it was like a weird sort of like mix of movies. Like there were some like standouts, um, but also some things that like at the time seemed like they were going to be like the movie to define 2021. But I think as we get further removed from it, um, Titane or Titane, whatever, however you want to pronounce it, maybe you're somewhere in between. I think that this will be the movie that will, continue to like be the standout from this year. So Nick, to like get into the actual discussion about this movie, because it's such a recent release, I am kind of interested to hear how you came to this movie and sort of like if there was any anticipation, what your initial thoughts were after seeing it. Like, did you see this in theaters or was it something that like maybe some word of mouth got back to you? What did that all look like for you in this movie in 2021?
Well, in 2017, I had gone to my local Lemley theater and seen Julia's previous movie, Raw. And so when I
Nice.
heard that she was working on a new film and then it won the Palme d'Or, I was like, well, definitely. So went to see it in theaters. I think the first time I used like my A list at AMC and went and saw it, and took my wife to that. She wasn't super thrilled at the end. And even as I watched it last night, she's like, "Oh, I remember this movie." And I liked it so much that I went back to that same Lemley like a week later and caught an afternoon matinee. And there was an old couple that came in who I don't think they had any idea what the movie was or what they were getting into. And they were sitting next to me, like, so I could see them in my peripheral vision. And the scene where
Mhm.
she goes into the bathroom and starts breaking her own nose, they're just like, nope, we're done. And they got up and left. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's that kind of movie.
Yeah, I mean, I love a movie where you're seeing people who are getting up and and leaving in the middle of the
Hmm.
screening. But you it's complete opposite end of that spectrum. You're like, I gotta go back for more and see this a second time. So were those the only two times that you'd have seen this, or is
I
this
had
like a yearly rewatch for you at this point?
Not quite yearly, but I think mathematically, if I averaged it out, it's about once a year now. Because when it first
Mhm.
hit streaming for the first time, which I think it went to Hulu first, I watched
Mhm.
it when it hit streaming, and then I watched it again on Canopy last night. So I was like, "Hey, library collection has this now for good reason." So I watched it for free there rather than on Tubi with commercials, because sometimes like an intense movie is not the thing to watch on Tubi. It's like,
Love Tubi.
yeah.
Big fan of Tubi. I watched this on Tubi. It was an interesting way to consume the movie. And like I mentioned, I'm starting my Saturday morning, with a big cup of coffee. I'm a little hungover and watching this movie with commercials. It's just like I was in like a weird sort of like fugue state like the whole time of like there's a lot happening within this space right now.
Oh, I can imagine, because I watched Martyrs for the first time on Tubi, and that was a huge mistake, because it's like, oh, multiple homicide, shotgun to the face, Tide commercial. I'm like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of needed the break, but at the same time, like, now the vibes are all off. I'm not like in the zone with this movie anymore. And I think this movie is a movie that I loved at the time because of how intense it was. And even though I've
Mhm.
seen the movie multiple times, there's still like moments where I can feel my hand is just like clenched, because I'm like just like I'm just like wincing seeing what's happening, and I know it's happening. I've seen it multiple times, but to still have that sort of visceral knee jerk reaction to it, on a fourth viewing, I think says a lot about the way that it's shot and the way that it's told.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. It's like an absolute I'm going to use the cliche. It's total like tour de force in terms of filmmaking. So you were clearly drawn to this movie after your first viewing.
Oh yeah.
What was it specifically like in that viewing that like stuck out to you, that spoke to you about this movie? where you were like, hell yeah, I'm all in on this.
Bring the car around. We're going again. I think, like
Wait,
I
going
said,
again to the movie, or you're going again with the car?
both. I feel like it was just so intense the first time. And it really wasn't looking to ever pacify that feeling. So I
Hmm.
appreciated, like, we're just going to sit in how tense it is throughout the entire movie. And, like, whether it's personal relationships, whether it's like the impending murder that's going to happen, or whether it's Alexia alone in the bathroom having to make a very, like, difficult choice about her anatomy. All
Hmm.
of multiple times in the movie she does that, and I felt like I was left to be, like, very uneasy throughout it. And I mean, I have, like, a high tolerance for gore, um
Hmm.
and just sort of, like, visceral footage in general. And even though this movie is not that gory,
Hmm.
the visuals and the way that it's shot and the music just had me on edge the whole time. And I enjoyed it. Not quite like a roller coaster, but a thrill ride, in the way that, like, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm uncomfortable in a place that's well within my tolerance range.
Yeah, there's a yeah, like you said, there's an intensity to it, even though so much of the movie is like kind of tender in a lot
Hmm.
of ways. I think I just want to throw it out now that I believe we're most likely going to get into spoilers in this discussion. I feel like
Yeah.
it'll be hard to talk about this movie at length without talking about some things that could be considered kind of
Woo!
spoilery. You you might be able to listen and have all of those things spoiled for you and like still definitely go and watch this movie and enjoy it for so many different reasons. But for me, the sort of like the not necessarily shock, but the what I was like expecting this movie to be, especially as it was going along, and having seen Raw before going into this viewing, where Raw is a movie that like in a sort of like conventional way, like continuously ramps up as the story progresses, you know, like the intensity of the kills, the violence, all of that stuff. It's like steadily ramping up. And this movie starts out like pretty hot in terms of how the violence is ramping up within the first like 30 to 40 minutes. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh my God, how are we going to continue on this path going forward for another hour and 10 minutes? This is going to be insane. And then I feel like the rug is kind of pulled out from underneath us as audience members. And I was like, for me, like the first time watching this movie, like that was what totally threw me away, where I was like, oh, I'm not watching an extremely violent movie about some serial killer. I'm watching a movie about a dude who needs to take care of someone, who needs to take care of a child. And that's kind of beautiful, but also like really, really intense in how all of it's done.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sweetest and probably most sincere movie about a serial killer who fucks a car and has a monster baby that you'll ever watch. And that's probably the thing that really drew me into it more so than the violence, the pacing, the music, the color, the style. Like, all those things are great. But the fact that in the midst of all that, it ended up being this very tender and broken love story about how
Mhm.
these two characters who, I mean, definitely Alexi is not a good person,
Yeah.
but she finds somebody who needs somebody to take care of, like you said. And sort of just like seeing how those people are able to, like, occupy a space that works for both of them despite how broken and how troubled the both of them are is really sweet. And yeah, that made me come back and be like, I need to see this again, because did I misread that? Did I really just have a good time? Is the whole point of the movie really to circumvent our expectations of violence and perceived, like, sexual perceptions of women on screen in these roles?
Mhm.
And then, yeah, all the style and everything that I love about it is still there every time I watch it. But even more so this time, I felt that the story between her and the dad has it's really like where the meat of all of it is, because you go back to look at how the movie starts with her car accident, and then
Hmm.
there's this scene in the hospital that like it didn't track as much with me the first few times I saw it, but it's like she's a kid and she's in the neck brace and she's just like staring at her dad as this
Yeah.
happens, and like you can tell that there's like just this chasm between them, and then you fast forward to her adulthood. So I mean, she's what, 18, 20, 20, somewhere between 18 and 25 probably.
Yeah.
And she's wearing like a ratty concert t-shirt and some shorts and just like sitting on the couch munching cereal, and the dad comes in and they're on opposite sides of the kitchen preparing completely different types of meals. He comes and sits down at the table, camera facing. She's television facing away from the camera, and it's like you can just tell that there's just like nothing works between the two of them. So to then take that and turn it upside down and put her in a situation where it probably still shouldn't work, but the person that she's with is so invested in making it work that she like can't help but be won over by his sincerity and his amount of caring. I think it's a very challenging thing to pull off, but worked surprisingly well, and I think continues to work well the more I see it.
Yeah. The whole like, you know, parent child dynamic becomes like super apparent once you know what the movie is about and are able to like revisit it. And like you're saying with that, very short scenes in the beginning of the movie where we learn everything that we need to know about her relationship to like her biological father, between like that opening car crash and the way that they interact or like don't interact in their own home. It's amazing. And like, when she's like sitting there watching TV on the couch, she has like a pretty like chill demeanor, and then her dad walks in and she immediately becomes like the most uh like annoyed person in the world. Just like his mere presence absolutely shifts her her entire vibe and persona. And then, you rewatch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's so obvious, because like then the second half of the movie makes that much more sense when we realize that like that is kind of like, I don't want to say the whole point of the movie because there is a lot going on here, but that feels like the sort of like main point of the movie is that sort of parent child relationship. Obviously there's a ton here in terms of like parents being unable to like accept their children for who they are for whatever reason that might be. There's a lot of talk about this movie being sort of like about like a trans or trans adjacent experience, and obviously like parenting with that can pose like its own set of problems where some people might be kind of cold, and other parents are like, I don't give a fuck, like you're my kid, and like that's that. Um so with that, I think we could either spoke a lot about the style of this movie, which I think is obviously one of the like things that makes it so great. Obviously, there's a lot with the story, but then it's also an extremely, maybe not thematically rich, but there are a ton of themes that are happening sort of like all at once in this movie. So I'm gonna sort of like leave it up to you. We can do a choose your own adventure of which of those three topics we want to follow the path down.
Well, I think probably I would start with, or I'd start at the thematic representations in this film, because I listened to some interviews with Julia, and I read a really interesting Q&A that was part of the Final Girls website, and she talked about this survey that was going around in the Paris subway about if you're a woman, respond to this survey if you've ever been the victim of like any of these kinds of like violence or harassment on the subway. And later the results were published in the paper, and it was 100%. So she's like, just the existence of being a woman, like even if it's the most innocuous person walking by you, it could be a priest or a saint or something, and you're still like clutching your keys ready to be defensive. And so she
Hmm.
wanted to build a character that like encompassed the anger of that and the frustration of that and just lashed out. And I think what we get with Alexia is a character who does suffer a childhood trauma, but never sort of blames that on who she is. Like she acts in maybe disproportionate acts of violence against people, but maybe not. Like she gets chased through the parking lot, like that drum score that is accompanying them as she like makes her
Yeah.
way to the car, and the sort of implicit nature of this man who feels very entitled to her attention, like is murdering him there an appropriate response? I don't know. That's for the audience to decide. And I like that Julia, as a filmmaker, is like, I'm not really interested in giving you the answer to that question. And the more we find out about this character, the more we find out that she kills a lot of people. And it's never this thing of her taking time to blame her father or to blame the head injury or to blame the relationship. It's just that she's a violent person. She's not a good person. I think it's also important to have movies where the main character isn't a good person. Like it's
Yeah.
okay, and because it's like there's people who aren't good people in the world, and like ignoring that exists is, I think just sweeping it under the rug. But when we get to, like, even though she's a murderer, her deciding to do what she does to Vincent and pretend to be this person's missing child, I was like, that's so fucked up. That's even worse maybe
Yeah.
than being a murderer, because it's just coming from like such a dark place, and it is coming from a place of desperation and not wanting to get caught, and just the fear of reprisal. But to
Mhm.
just that casually and haphazardly fill this emotional void of this person who's in so much pain, and to do it in a way that has very little care, I love that it just creates this huge vacuum and like takes all the air out of the situation, so that you're kind of working from zero as they get to know each other. And I think that makes their relationship work.
The idea that that is, like, the most devious thing that she does in the whole movie, after we see her pull one of her, hair chopsticks and stick it into a guy's ear and, right into his brain, that
Hmm.
pretending to be this guy's lost son is still the worst thing that she does in the time that we spend with her. Do you think that there's anything to a like the relationship that she has to like sex and violence, where it seems like whenever there's something like close to a sexual encounter, her immediate reaction is to get violent? Like you said, there's nothing that's presented to us that would sort of like explain why that might be the case, but it seems like that sort of like connection is there for that character, at least based on the two main points of like violence that we see in the movie.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it definitely comes down to an intimacy thing,
Hmm.
because that is the fear. And like the further we get into the story, it's it's developing like actual genuine intimacy with Vincent that I don't know if it ultimately changes her perspective or her character, but it humanizes her and gives us something to latch onto. And you see that, I mean, when the guy kisses her in the parking lot, like it's a sexual assault. Like she wants to defend herself. Like, yeah, I get that. When she's sort of like fooling around with her girlfriend on the couch, even before that, when they're outside by the pier, like
Yeah.
she doesn't understand like intimacy and kindness and care and like being gentle. Like all that stuff is just like not part of the equation for her.
Oh yeah,
So
dude, her
she's,
biting the nipple ring
oh
like
my
that,
god, like my
like
hand, like white knuckled. I'm just like, oh, she's gonna rip it out. It
yeah.
looks so painful. So she goes from that, and it like freaks her out. And then when she's still shown some care by this other woman, and they go inside and they're like fooling around a little bit again, she's like, no, I can't take it. Stabbed her in the face, and then
Yeah.
stabs her in the ear too. And then she's like, well, now I got to kill everybody in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, as one does,
Yeah,
that's sort
got
of, yeah,
I got to get away with it.
standard practice. Yeah, if you're killing one roommate, then you gotta kill the rest.
It's not the party
Um,
house you want to be at that night.
no, not at all. Poor Jerome. He's,
Right?
you know, trying to be a sweet guy. And, he just takes a what is he takes like a fireplace stick to the gut.
Yeah. She like broke his
Brutal.
spine with it or something. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
You just hear the
The
crunching. Ugh.
The like visceral nature of the violence in this movie, again, even with something as small as like biting a nipple ring too hard, all the way up to hair chopsticks into someone's ear, it's all it's all done in a way where you can't help but like flinch, or like you're saying, like white knuckle while watching. Was there like one particular moment of violence that like stuck out to you as the most gruesome? And like, what is it, do you think, about the way that the director, whose name is escaping me at the moment and I don't think I'll be able to pronounce correctly, like what is it about the way that she shoots and presents all the violence that like makes it, that gives us that like visceral reaction to it?
Well, she's definitely not afraid of a close up, so that's a benefit. And I think a lot of the style also is like the implication of what might happen. So there's tension, there's anticipation, which heightens fear. And I think it's actually what is the best part of like a good horror film, is that it's about what you fear happening, or I hope that it would be more so than like what actually happens. Because at a certain point, like if everything is gore, then like, okay, well, it's like, yeah, sure, everything is bloody, but like I'm not afraid of anything happening because that's the only thing that's happening. And
Mhm.
so in this, it's like an interesting mix of, you've already seen this character be violent to the point where like someone could die. And then every interaction after that, like you don't know what is going to be the tipping point or how far this person is going to go. And after you kill an entire house full of people, like really sky's the limit at that point. But in terms of like the most gruesome, uh, I feel like the stomach tearing as
Mm.
the pregnancy belly grows is pretty nasty, and I think it's done digitally, so if it were done practically with some like oozing effects, it might have been more impactful, because I still think the attempted self-abortion in the bathroom, like you don't see any like gore or anything really gruesome there, but like
Yeah,
knowing what's happening is like just, oh man, that's rough.
it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. That's, yeah, that one sticks out. For some reason for me, when she is trying to first pose as Adrian, and I think this is what you're talking about with the like anticipation of what might happen. There is so much buildup to her trying to break her nose,
Mm.
and even on this like on this rewatch, I was like, there's no way that we're just gonna like stay on this shot. Like we're gonna cut away. We're gonna cut away as she's going down or something, because the buildup to it is intense enough that we don't need to actually like see the act of her smacking her face on the sink.
Mhm.
And then it happens, and you're like, all that buildup, and it's still, ugh, like it's still making me cringe in ways
Mhm.
that like, I can't believe that someone is actually like willing to go that far as a filmmaker in terms of like presenting this kind of like level of gruesome violence on screen. It is truly remarkable. And then, we get into the second half of the movie and it's not as gruesome, but like you're saying, because we've seen it, so like we're aware that it could happen. So that threat is always kind of like laying underneath the surface, always ready to pop out, even though it never like really does. But there are still moments of violence and gruesomeness, or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, and having to undo all of that in a way that sort of allows your audience to have a soft landing into like where the story is going to go is a difficult thing to do, because now you set the bar so high violence wise. And like that bathroom scene where she breaks her nose is the one where the old people are like, I'm done with this movie.
Yeah.
I'm walking out of the theater because of this. And had they stuck around, like things probably don't get better for them, honestly, afterwards. Like it could even be worse, but it would be less of that kind of violence. But yeah, like you just enter into a completely different territory in terms of character motivations, because you have this dad who in the absence of his son, has turned to like steroids and physical fitness and being the leader of this fire brigade. And like, that's kind of all he has. So he's shooting his own ass up with steroids in the bathroom, and he ODs the second time we see him do it. And it's like after a
Mhm.
fight. So Alexia is coming back as Adrian at that point, and Vincent is passed out on the bathroom floor. And like, she knows he's vulnerable, obviously. Like, they just had a moment of tension the night before.
Mhm.
And she pulls the stick out of her hair and like, or out of her pocket or something. I think it was in the jacket because shaved head at that point, but was about to stab Vincent in the ear and like just continue the pattern that we had seen.
Yeah.
And there's something that stops her in that moment. And it's like this tacit agreement between the filmmaker and the audience that like that cycle of violence is over because of the relationship that is developed here. And even though their relationship is troubled, it's more intimate, more personal, probably more long lasting and like actual communication than any of the other relationships we see in the film. Like, even the mom is very dismissive of her when she says her
Mhm.
stomach hurts. She's like, oh, you're probably just on your period or something. Have your dad look at you. And then even he doesn't want to like touch his daughter and actually do a full
Yeah.
exam. She reaches up to him and pulls his hand back, like, no, like, touch me, like, embrace me as your child. And he doesn't do
Yeah.
that. And so just the fact that all that has happened, and then she meets Vincent, who has issues, but has gone into this like with a fully open heart and is willing to really like wound himself very, very deeply in the name of fostering this relationship. And she finally just like calms down for a second, and then like the movie goes on from there, and it's a different trajectory.
There's something obviously really special about that scene, and I think you brought up a good point where I had said that her violence was kind of tied to sexual encounters, and you had tied it to just like a fear of intimacy. And I think in that moment with Vincent in the bathroom where she finds him after he ODs on his steroids, as we all do, and
Yeah, barely made it here.
um, yeah, I was doing so much steroids before this. I was doing all of the steroids.
Just in my jaw so I can talk real good.
Yeah. But she like so there's that moment of intimacy with him where she's like, "Oh man, like this is a person who like cares about me. I kind of care about him. I don't like that. Let me pull out my trusted chopstick and stab him in the face." But I'm going to take a shot in the dark where I think that she feels some sort of connection to him in that moment because she realizes that he is also sort of like performing and presenting a version of his body. We don't have to say necessarily like masculinity because like, you know, um, we could also say that in a way that they're both performing and presenting masculinity in ways that might be uncomfortable or whatever to them. I feel like she feels like a bit more of a connection to him when she realizes that he is also doing these things to his body that he maybe
Good point.
shouldn't be doing in order to present a certain way to the world. And that was kind of like my big takeaway from this movie, not so much as like a, like trans allegory, but like all of us do these like performative presentations of our bodies and like who we are to the world, but like specifically the body. We all have that no matter like where you fall on the cis to trans sort of spectrum, whether you're Vincent or Alexia. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that and like what it is that he's doing to his body and sort of the connection between the two characters on that front.
No, that's a fantastic point. It's something I didn't really think of, so I'm glad you brought that up, because we do have Vincent, who is this character whose entire outward physical presentation is strength, and
Mhm.
it's really only to mask the fact that the void of his missing son has like destroyed him as a man and as a father and just as a human being. And so he puts on this strong front to hide from the fact that he's like empty inside. And when when his ex-wife comes back and they have dinner together, and sitting at the table, and he's like, how do you do it? Like, how do you live in this house with his empty room there and all his toys, and like the walls of this place still smell like him? Like, how do you do it? And she obviously was not capable of staying in that space and absorbing that kind of pain for that amount of time. I think it was what,
Mhm.
10 years or so between the
Yeah.
disappearance. Um so you have this character in Vincent who's just been like wallowing in the loss of his child and coming home to the reminders of it all the time. And it's very gutting to think of, and so I kind of understand why he's just like, shit, I gotta rage out and just go do pull-ups until my arms don't work anymore so I can
Yeah.
pass out. And you have Alexia coming into this equation, also like hiding in plain sight, like you said, do not just with like, oh, the sudden onset pregnancy and like the plate in her head that sort of make her different in general, but then on top of that, like the binding of the body to present a certain way outwardly. So recognizing, I think, the weakness that's in Vincent and the
Yeah.
pain that's in him in that moment, she like finally saw someone who's hurting as much as she was, maybe, and
Yeah.
is like, this is why I'm not gonna stab him in the head. But that also does come after the scene in the film where they dance in the living room to, I think it's She's Not There,
Mhm.
and they're fighting, and he's struggling to communicate, and he's like, I'm gonna put on this, and I'm gonna dance, and we're gonna dance, and it becomes very much like rough play between a father
Mhm.
and son that you'd see when like significantly younger for both of them. And that opens up something in Alexia where it's okay to like have this physicality, and they fight and they dance and they scuffle, and she wants to stab him then, and I love it. He's like, he sees the needle, he's like, are you in a knitting club? And I'm like, wow, this movie really like does have a dark sense of humor that carries a lot of these scenes. And he's so happy to just like have the interaction that he's like, go ahead, attack me, like try to stab me, like it's all good. And then they're exhausted at
Yeah.
the end, and it's, hey, if you really want to leave, there's the keys, like you're home. I don't know what you need to hear, but like you're home now, so there's nothing to run from. And then like, yeah, Lexia goes out and like is about to leave and then decides to come back. So
Is that the bus scene
yeah, yeah.
that happens in between? Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so you brought up their father-son dance to the zombie song. Dancing also plays
Yeah.
oddly a big role in this movie. What do you think about all of the different dances and like what they do throughout the movie? I don't know. I found that to also be like one of the more interesting sort of like aspects of what's going on here.
Well, I think with the benefit of hindsight, it's easy to look at those scenes and be like, these are maybe the most freely expressive moments for these characters. You see Alexia in
Mhm.
the beginning with the car, like embracing sort of the love of that car physically. You see them dancing together and sort of having like a rough father son intimate moment. Later, the pink scene where all the
Mhm.
firefighters are dancing, celebrating, and it gets kind of like weird and intimate and slow, and it like kind of everything just like falls away. And then at the end we have Alexia as well dancing on top of the fire truck, and it's sort of coming full circle to like who this person was and now currently is. And
Yeah.
I was reading that interview with Julia, and she mentioned like specifically she loves dancing and like she did it a lot as a kid, and she wanted to incorporate that, but also she knew that this was going to be a character who like wasn't talking for a lot of the movie and wanted to make
Mhm.
sure that there was a way to be expressive. And she's like, yeah, this is probably the best way to do it, because you just feel the physicality and like you express so much emotion through dance that doesn't require dialogue. And so the investment in that, I think, actually like makes a lot more sense when you look at it through that lens. And I didn't read that until after I had rewatched it again. So now that
Mhm.
I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, this sort of dance on top of the fire truck, which is very like seductive, very feminine for the most part,
Mhm.
sort of embraces like that everybody is now in on the truth to some degree, and that Alexia is free to express herself in the way that she most most well knows.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a symmetry to all the dances, I think, and I think they're yeah, you named the 4. The first one with the car, which is like performing femininity in like, you know, the most obvious ways possible. Also
Exactly.
coming on the tail end of like an amazing single take tracking shot through the entire car
Yeah.
show. But she's it's like almost a what would be known as like a stripper dance, um but like very much so like highlighting uh all of the femininity like in her body in a lot of ways. And then you have the 2 middle ones, which are very sort of like masculine dances. Like there's so many shots of like just like shirtless firemen with these like great sculpted bodies. I wasn't jealous or anything watching them dance and bop around, but like expressing their masculinity in like very like obvious ways, both when it's just Alexia and Vincent, and then the 2 dances with like all the other firefighters, and then the dance at the end where she is like she hears the song and is like transported back to her other self, and it's almost like she doesn't even like realize that the song like immediately makes her it's almost like a form of like hypnosis where she hears the song and she just like snaps back into the same dance. But that same doing that same dance in the body that she is presenting to these firefighters, it reads so much differently than when she's wearing like fishnet stockings and like booty
Yeah.
shorts. Which I don't know, what it means exactly, but the fact that those 2 dances like exist on opposite ends of the movie, and it's the same dance, but because of like how and where they're performed, they feel totally different. And like the reaction as, to be honest, like a male audience member, they feel completely different. Um,
For sure. I mean, you see that in the firefighters. Like these dudes are drinking, shirtless, like rubbing their sweaty bodies together, and then Alexia gets up there, and they're like, "Well, that's weird. Like,
yeah.
why is Adrian dancing that way? This is too feminine and weird." It's like you guys were just like rubbing your nude chest together. Like,
Yeah.
calm down on the judgment here, fellas.
The
Uh,
line between homoeroticism and homophobia is very, very thin.
yeah, so I think Julie as a filmmaker is very well aware of that, right? And the bookends of those 2 dances, plus both of those are like dance, car, and then it ends with her having sex with one of these cars. In this case, at the
Yeah.
end, it's the fire truck.
How does that
And
work? How do
I don't
you
know. Me too. I was like, what part of the fire truck is she fucking exactly?
Yeah,
Because I don't think it's a stick shift.
I get the first car. The first car makes sense, but you can't have pregnant car sex. That's ridiculous. That's silly.
That's
That's a
one
bridge too far.
step too.
That's a half star down on Letterbox for me. You can only have sex with cars when you're not already pregnant. That's
Yeah,
we
lowriders
all
only.
know. Yeah. But I mean, like you're saying, like the fact that they both end with like a car encounter, also pretty interesting. Again, I don't know what it means. I don't know if you were going further. I feel like I interrupted you with a bad joke.
No, I was ready with that, my own bad joke, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to like wrap my head around it because it's very different. It's not even shown as intimately as the previous one, where there's sort of this beckoning from a distance and oh my god, what's that? And I'm naked and I'm vulnerable and
Mhm.
I walk out and the car's got its headlights on and the engine's revving, and it's this sort of like call to action in that way
Mhm.
after this act of violence. In this case, it's like all of this stuff happens, the dance happens, and then it's just finally alone in the warehouse with the fire truck. And it's like uh, it's a release more than it feels like an act of passion, because
Mhm.
yeah, the cinematography in that scene is like, no, we're just gonna shoot it from this one angle. It's gonna be very short. Where in the other scene, like you get inside the car, outside the car, through the sunroof. She's wrapped up with the seatbelts. Like it's a whole production there, and so it's a very very different feeling. The color in the scene is way muted down too, like considering it's a fire truck where red is just a natural part of it. It's
Mhm.
cut so close that really you don't even see much color. It's all just like the gray on the inside, so it's not presented as like this glamorous act or this, she doesn't seem super horny in the way that she does in the beginning of the film. So to me it's like the closing of that loop of like,
Mhm.
this is the person that we started with, and then now that she's like fully actualized this combination of acceptance of being both Adrian and Alexia at the same time, now like we're closing the loop and sort of ending where we started, and then like it's falling action from there.
You made a lot of really good points about the difference in those 2 scenes, but I just have to point out the absurdity in you, like, very astutely breaking down what made one car sex scene very sexy and the other one just sort of there.
That's what I'm here for.
The there was a passion in the first one that wasn't there,
Yeah.
but you broke it down beautifully, but still just, like, an absurd. Did you ever think that you would, at one point in your life, be breaking down what makes, um, sex with a car in one scene sexy in ways that sex with a car in another scene is not?
I never dreamed of these lofty ideals in the past, but I'm glad. If someone had to do it, I'm glad that it's me, because I think back of like, we're talking about formative movies and stuff from the past, and Christine is one of those films for me, John Carpenter's
Mhm,
film. And I had gone on Felicia's Seeing It Faces in Movies podcast, and we talked about Christine and sort of how that whole relationship is an allegory for addiction to some degree, and
mhm.
like what it does to the character. But seeing a vehicle imbued with human personalities and characteristics, I think is very, it's a very interesting way to tell these character stories. But also when you think of car culture, like there's always been this idea of sort of like guys that are really into cars, like they name their cars and the car is usually feminine. So to flip that
Mhm.
and be like, no, Alexia is in car culture, but she views the car as men, and the cars are even presented more masculine in that case.
Yeah.
So I like that. And if I wasn't a fan of Christine, then I may not even like begin to travel down that road.
Do you think there's something to the first car being covered in flames and then her ending up posing as a firefighter and
Oh yeah.
her second sex scene happening with a fire truck?
Yeah, I mean, she sets her parents on fire, you know?
Yeah.
So there is, I think there's also this thing of like the cleansing nature of fire.
Mhm.
And, she literally like burns her old life away and leaves. And then in the process of posing as a firefighter, we get a lot of scenes. There's the forest fire where daddy decides to nuke his little too investigative protege there. It's like, no, you
Yeah.
hold this propane tank in the firestorm. So like you have that moment that is like this, everything's on fire at that point. I think that's kind of this gradual progression of she lights the fire in the basement and then leaves before we see the fire spread. Like you see her observing it and sort of like engulfs that one room. Then
Mhm.
as she's training as a firefighter, you see what the flames look like in a controlled environment, quote unquote, and that's engulfing like an entire building. And then by the time we get to that final fire, it's like everything is on fire because everything is so precarious at that point. You have the character
Yeah.
like ready to out them. You almost fear at that point that Vincent is ready to say that no, you screwed me over, and like all of this is about to be gone. So like the gradual progression of the intensity of the fire I think is important as well. And so maybe that's really where that fire truck comes in at the end, is like all of that is extinguished by finally melding these personalities and
Damn.
accepting like who you are as both of these characters.
That's That's an insanely deep way to think about sex with a fire truck. But I'm totally on board with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally love that reading. I want to circle back to Vincent, but first, I want to talk about one of the other scenes,
Mhm.
like surrounding the firefighting aspect of the movie that I found to be really interesting, and that's the scene where they go to the house call where
Oh, yeah.
the son, has overdosed and they're singing the Macarena together while doing CPR, and like
Crazy, right?
it, a very, very, very bizarre scene, but also one that I think has like a lot of like emotional weight. What did you think about everything that was sort of happening there?
I feel like it's a point in the movie where all of the thematic stuff is kind of beginning to stack
Mhm.
because the stakes are high in that you're sort of like an active firefighter now, number one. You're coming to help somebody who's OD'd. Uh, in the process of that, the the mom or the grandma who called in the 911 call dies. So it's
Mhm.
like this scene is intensifying. You have probably like the three characters who are maybe not fully aware, but are all involved in some degree of Alexia's secret.
Mhm.
Then when the old lady croaks, the dad is just like, "Oh, great, now she's croaking too." So it's like this acknowledgement of just like how ridiculous like what's happening is, and
Mhm.
then to turn all that into this really kind of sweet moment between the two of them of like, I'm going to teach you how to do CPR right now. I know, like, hold on, we have to sort of make this palatable in a way that you'll understand. Okay, so it's going to be the Macarena, like the most ludicrous way that you could
Yeah.
probably go about that. Hey, you know this song, right? You know the rhythm. um but that moment of like a father teaching who they believe to be their son, their trade,
Mhm.
and saving someone's life in the process. Like there's a lot of beauty in that, despite how ridiculous that scene sort of plays out.
Yeah. There's like a weird symmetry between Vincent doing CPR on the OD'd son while uh Alexia Adrian is doing CPR on the mom, and it's sort of like a flipped, like gendered role where
Yeah.
it's like a mom who loves her son so much and is trying to save him, and then you have this dad who is like trying to connect with this like son daughter kind of character, and you sort of, when it's like cutting back and forth between them doing the Macarena and giving CPR, it starts off where both of the bodies of the son and mother are in the shots, and then we cut to like a kind of closer shot of the two and it's just Vincent's face, and then it cuts to just Alexia's face, and it's like, I don't know, I felt like this weird sort of like symmetry of like they are like trying to like save this relationship between this other parent child, and their deep relationship, but also like in reality they're just saving or creating the relationship between the two of them as parent and child, which kind of leads me to the other question that I wanted to ask about Vincent, which I don't know if this question necessarily like helps or kind of like defeats the point in like how it is that we're supposed to read the movie. But do you think that he is aware the entire time that this is not his actual son? Or do you think that he actually has a moment, like a come to Jesus moment where he's like, okay, this actually isn't my child?
That is a good question because I think he's so desperate to fix that part of him that's hurting that he would really probably accept anybody stepping in there and saying, "Hey, I'm your long lost son." So I feel like he's always right on the verge of knowing but lying to himself. Excuse me, lying to
Hmm.
himself in order to begin healing, because even the whole act of him shooting up the steroids and like going and trying to like do the pull-ups to get to that next level. Like, he's constantly lying to himself about everything. Like, he's trying to like lie to
Mhm.
himself about the fact that he's aging.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty confident in saying that he's at least suspicious from the beginning, but is willing to overlook all that because even the ex-wife is like, he needs somebody. Like, so even though you're this fraud and what you're doing is horrible, like, just promise me that you're gonna like take care of him and be there for him. And so like
Yeah.
she's fully aware of how much he's hurting in the absence of their son as well. And so I do think he knows, but I just don't think he knows the extent until it's like, oh, this is you have breasts and you're pregnant. Like, you're clearly not my son in the flesh. So that's like the moment where like acceptance comes in. But even then, it's like, doesn't matter. You're my son. It's never
Yeah.
gonna matter. You're always gonna be my son. And so like his acknowledgement of that, even in the face of like the proof that shows to him this isn't your son, still just
Mhm.
like, nah, doesn't matter. You're my son. I love you. So
I don't care who you are, you're still my
yeah,
son.
which is a wonderful message too. And for someone that's in that much pain to be able to still love this person that has deceived them and really done a horrible act, to still forgive that and move forward, tells me that I could believe that he was aware of the fact that he was getting duped, at least to some degree.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same boat. He knew that he was getting duped to some degree, but his desire to just like unconditionally love someone was so strong that it never mattered, which again, there aren't a lot of movies about like unconditional love. Um so to see a character, especially like a parental character, just express and have this need to show someone unconditional love no matter what is extremely beautiful in a movie that like when you just like when you were like selling this movie to someone when you're
Right?
the obvious like way to sell it, the one liner is like it's a movie about a lady who has sex with cars, because like people hear that and they're like, okay, well, what is that? I have to check that out.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, fair.
and
That's fair.
someone tells me that about a movie, I'm like, I'm kind of intrigued. Let's see what's going on there. And you go in expecting that, or you start watching this movie about a serial killer, and you don't expect to get a beautiful story about parenthood and the desire to be a parent. With that, the two lead performances, both incredible. Do you have anything for us about what is going on with the performance of either of our two leads?
Well, I think like what we talked about with the dancing. I think with Agach, I think Agath, uh, so much of the role is presented physically. So
Mhm.
much of it, like even when she's a character who we fully expect to talk and has spoken and shown that to us, still so much of the performance is physical, whether it's the way that she sits on the couch at home or the way that she showers like she's running out of time or the way that she dances, right? All of these things in the performance are all done with a very intense sense of physicality. And reading that interview with Julia and seeing that she's like struggled to write that character, and I think she
Mhm.
said like there was a year where she'd go to the computer every day and like write and then just like immediately delete it because she's like, I couldn't, like, something wasn't right, whatever. I hated what I did. I'm paraphrasing, but she said
Mhm.
writing Vincent was so easy. So I love that because like his performance, I think, is the performance that makes the movie, because if he isn't there, then I don't know that anything else really clicks in the same way. I mean, I'm sure you could find another actor to play that role, but I think he nails the the pendulum of this person who is in like an intense amount of pain but is lying to themselves, and like it's a very fine line to walk, because he has to communicate the pain like through a shroud.
Yeah.
And him doing that, like the scene where he's in the mirror like flexing after like having just done the steroids, like this presentation of this faux strength to himself, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not even for all the other muscly firemen so that like he looks in shape compared to all the younger guys. It's like, no, he's doing this and like looking at himself in the mirror and then like doing pull-ups by himself in the garage where the trucks are. So it's all this sort of very, very manicured presentation of himself. And
Yeah.
I feel like his performance maybe helps us as the audience begin to understand Alexia, because it's
Mhm.
like you're coming from a place where like this person's a murderer and is doing like these horrible things. You're going to need to be able to gain sympathy at some point in order to like keep the story going and to end where you end. So by bringing in this character Vincent, who is like going through his own shit and doing it in a way that isn't lashing out with murders,
Mhm.
and like is still expressing care and love, it's a very tough thing to do. And I loved his performance. He's fantastic in it, and so is
Yeah.
she, honestly.
Yeah. The degree of difficulty of Agatha. I
Yeah,
don't know how you Agatha. Uh, that's my really bad French impression.
yeah.
But like,
The
yeah,
French are gonna hate this.
the the French already
Apologies.
hate this show.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. I know the feeling.
The degree of difficulty of her performance, where like so much of it, like you said, is unspoken, and also like having to like live in this sort of like gender fluid kind of like world of, and being able to present as super gender fluid, but then like you were saying, where the two, in order to like have sympathy for the Alexia Adrian character, like we need the Vincent character, because as a character that is sort of like way easier to write, and I think for us as audience members, way easier to understand what he's going through. And because the two of them have so much in common in terms of like going through all these issues, in terms of like how it is that they're presenting to the world and struggling with like how it is that their body presents, and like not being happy with the way that their body presents. Like she doesn't like the pregnancy and like what it's doing to her body, and Vincent is just like, I need to be strong because that's like what guys do or whatever. So like they have all of that in common, but then on the flip side, they are coming from two complete opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of like care, where she is like, I don't know how to like care for another person or like have like a deep meaningful relationship with another person, and he's like, that is the only thing that will ever make me happy in this world. So through their sort of like shared experience of having difficulties with uh their bodies and all of that stuff, they're sort of able to meet in a middle ground where they are then able to care for each other. um the director, Julia
Cornell. Yeah, close enough.
Ducournau. There we go. Um, are French women the like best directors in the world? Because I feel like between Julia, obviously you have Claire Denis, who's like a goat. You have the woman who directed Portrait of a Lady on Fire, whose name escapes me at the moment, and the woman who directed The Substance, which was like one of the best movies of this year. Like we just have
Cornell.
like, yeah, they're just like, French women are making freaking bangers. Uh,
You are not wrong. It's Celine Sciamma who did Portrait of a
Celine
Lady on
Sciamma,
Fire,
yeah,
and she also did Petite Maman, which is fantastic as well.
Ye-
So I I I think my instinct is to say that I think the French culture has less of a fear of sex than it seems like definitely American filmmaking culture does right now. And by not having that fear, you can do things like we saw in The Substance or like we see in Titane that just sort of blow the doors off of that. Like if you're coming in with like a puritanical or like prude mindset about like what sex is and what it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to be represented on screen, like, well, good luck because these movies are going to drown you very early on. And so I like that there's sort of that unencumbered attitude around it. And I think they're also, coming off of the wave of like French extremity as well. So it's like you're coming from a film culture that was like known for like the most disturbing type of stuff.
Hmm.
So like you're cutting your teeth in a filmmaking space where things are already extreme and you're just sort of like finding your footing and your voice as a woman in that space, and I'm having a great time with it.
Yeah, no, I think the point that you're making about French culture, and I think more specifically French women being a lot more open with like their sexuality and their relationship to it within like society at large, is they're a lot more open about sort of like what that experience is like for them, and then because of that they're able to sort of like express things through film that, not to say that there like aren't American filmmakers who I, don't love, because there are like a lot of great American female film directors who are making like awesome things, but I just like
Oh,
don't know that we as a society are like able to talk about these things in like not even as open of a way, but like as just like abrasive as a way of a way. Like these movies are really just like there's like we're going all gas, no brakes, and I love it. And it allows for like really, really, really cool art that uh, uh not only pushes the limits of like the thematic elements, but like in a lot of ways is pushing they're pushing the limits of the art form, the style, the form itself, like with camera work and practical effects and all of these things that like we're just like not really doing in America right now, which I think has been really cool to sort of like get like a little bit of a taste of that, especially over the last couple of years.
oh, absolutely. And just like that, we're back in with the French. That's right. See, you stuck around long enough and we've come full circle. But yeah, I think you're right. I think right now in American cinema, I mean, every year at the Oscars, it's like, oh, are they even going to nominate a woman for Best
Yeah.
Director? So, like, the industry in and of itself has positioned itself to sort of only acknowledge a certain type of work by a certain type of person. And like, I don't, not saying anything at all about Sean Baker as a filmmaker or as a person, but he won 4 Oscars in one night. And
Mhm.
like you look at the list of all these other like great female directors who like have not even begun to scratch that level of success at the most prestigious uh industry award. And so if the nature of the beast in America is sort of gatekeeping that, like how do you as a female director in that space even begin to make something as challenging as you might want to
Mhm.
when there's going to be so many voices saying no, don't do that, or you can't do that, more importantly, or we're not going to finance you doing
Yeah.
that. And it's like I think back to Chloe Zhao winning, and it's like she wins, she does Eternals, and then I haven't really heard from Chloe since then.
Yeah.
So right,
The
it's like, okay, you got the Oscar, now you make the Marvel movie and your career
yeah.
is over.
Not to, get too much into it, but like the kinds of movies about femininity that like we see in America are sort of like boxed into very specific kinds of topics, whether it be Nomadland, uh, Barbie, and like everything else that Greta Gerwig has done. Movies like that, they were sort of like as a film culture or like culture at large, like not really ready for movies like Titane or The Substance, Even though those have both done like gangbusters here in the States, but like we're not fostering that environment for like filmmakers within this country to like do awesome shit like that.
Yeah, because like honestly, I'd love to see Greta Gerwig make a movie at like her most angry. To
Yeah.
see like what does she really have to say that she's been holding back on all these years. And I hope something like Barbie and the financial success of that has opened the door for her to sort of like make that fuck you movie. Because
Mhm.
that's the stuff that I want to see. And I really like Mariel Heller as a director as well. And she just did Night Bitch, and Night Bitch kind of just like came and went. It was relegated to the movie where Amy Adams is a dog, and like, okay, just get that out of here. So
Yeah.
even a female filmmaker that I like who's making a movie that's a different sort of take on the pains of motherhood and sort of like having some really honest discussions about what motherhood takes from you rather than being a movie about like, oh, it's so rewarding to be a mom kind of thing.
Mhm.
uh Even a movie like that, which I feel like would have some resonance, kind of just got
Yeah.
shelved and forgotten about.
This movie does have some of that. I have not seen Night Bitch, and I do love Amy Adams, but I do think that this movie has elements of that for sure. Also, like, is doing interesting stuff with like female gaze versus male gaze, all that kind of stuff. Like, I did see some reviews of this movie that said that there were like too many ideas and like too many themes sort of packed in, and that caused them to be half baked or underbaked or whatever. But I didn't necessarily find that. I think that there are some themes that are um more prevalent and like have like a lot more meat on the bone, but I think the other ones, I think it's fine to just like present ideas and have that also be sort of like a like sub theme of a movie. Not necessarily like we don't need to flesh out like, female gaze and like the horrors of pregnancy on the body or whatever, we can sort of like mix and match and have all of these things sort of like happening at the same time, which I think is something that this movie does like a really good job of balancing all of those different elements.
I'd rather have a lot of ideas colliding with one another than not enough ideas struggling to like put a full feature together. And we talked about art earlier, like as a general concept, and I'm sure people looked at Jackson Pollock when he was painting and being like, "This is just like a mess," right?
Mhm.
But there's a method to the madness. And I think with Julia, she definitely has a method to her madness. And I want to see more of what she's doing. She's got a new project in the works. She directed a couple episodes of why is it escaping me? Servant, the M Night Shyamalan Apple
Nice.
TV
Yeah.
series, and I was like, oh, this is right up her alley. Of course, she's going to do this. So I'm excited to see what her next project is. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are excited to see it as well, because you look at a movie like Raw, that is intense as well, a little bit more like traditionally structured. And then you look at something like this,
Mhm.
like, what is the evolution going to be? Is it going to go beyond what we see here? Is it going to be maybe a more refined linear narrative like we saw from Raw? Even some of her short films explore some of this stuff too. So yeah, I mean, literally, whatever she wants to do next, I'm on board. I'll be there as long as it gets distributed.
Absolutely. I think that she has I think when you said the word angry, I think that's the word that you use.
Yeah,
There's a really cool like anger to this movie. It's like it's kind of
yeah,
it's kind of it's kind of rock and roll,
for
like
sure.
this movie like kicks you in your teeth, and it like it grabs you and it doesn't let go. It really just shakes you up and forces you to deal with it as an artistic. I'm going to use the phrase again, tour de force. Which again, let someone like this make all of the movies that they want to with all of the creative control, because we're going to get some kick-ass stuff, and it could be anywhere between this and Raw, or it could be something that is beyond both of these. And I think all of those options are very much so welcome, because it's
For
probably going to
sure.
kick ass again. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll literally watch any of it. Like, it doesn't matter if her name's attached to it. I want to see what she's doing. And look, worst case scenario, I go to a movie and I'm like, maybe I didn't like that one as much. But
Yeah.
I prefer to sort of exist in a place where I support the artist having the freedom to do the thing that they want to do, and the burden of liking it falling on my shoulders, rather than having an artist who's afraid to do the thing that they want to do and they try to make the thing that I want to see and then having it just feel like empty fan service, which, just you can do that, but you know, she said in the interview too that like people really wanted her to do Raw 2. And she was like, I don't want to do that.
Hmm.
And I would rather sit there in front of that blank page for a year every day than to do the thing that they're telling me to do. So
I
to
thought
me,
this was
that's
gonna
what
be
I want.
Yeah, I thought this was gonna be Raw 2. I thought it was gonna, instead of, spoiler alert, cannibalism ramping up and up, I
Yeah.
thought it was just gonna be, you know, uh, sorta lesbian car sex serial killer stuff, just in the same vein as Raw,
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
we got something totally different, and that was awesome. That was amazing. So Nick, I feel like we kinda have hit on a lot of
We did. We talked
the
about a lot.
yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff. There's a lot to talk about here. Is there anything that we may have missed that we still need to bring up?
Not necessarily missed, but I think there is this undercurrent in the movie that is acknowledging that like broken people find one another.
Mhm.
And that's not like the point of the movie, but there is an understanding of like that is just sort of how cosmically these two people ended up in uh, a situation that worked for both of them. But I also wanted to ask you too. Uh, Alexia's got a lot of tattoos, right? Do you notice the one
Mhm.
that's right sort of on her chest in between her boobs?
So I didn't notice it. I did come across what it said while doing some research on the
Mm.
movie. I tried to, like, I was squinting at my screen like, what does that say over there? What is it? Love is a dog from hell?
Yeah, and so I felt like either like based on the other tattoos she had, I wasn't sure that that was a real tattoo, where I was pretty confident that the ones around her hands and the one on her arm and stuff, I was like, I feel like those are all belonging to the actress. I feel
Mhm.
like this one, based on where it is and how often we see it, might not be. And I didn't look up whether or not it was a real one or not. But in that scene where she has sex with the lowrider in the beginning, like we get the sunroof view top down, and it's like you see it there, and that's where I like read it, and I was like,
Mhm.
huh. I was like, I wonder what this means. And then the more we've talked about this, and the more that we brought Vincent into the conversation, I realized, like, think about the type of person that he is. He's like slamming the table. He's like, talk to me. He's like, he's jacked up. He's super protective. He's like this dog from hell that
Mm.
will do anything to protect her and love her unconditionally. And I was like, huh. I was like, is that really like what it was intended to be? So I don't know if it is or not, but I
I like
feel
that.
like I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to agree with you. I hadn't really thought about it until right now, but there are a lot of yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. There's totally a reading where that tattoo is Vincent, and it's right in the middle of her chest. No, that's not exactly where the heart is, but we can say that that is like on her heart in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. Uh, her accepting Vincent into her heart through that tattoo, accepting this dog from hell into, the love within her and all that stuff. I'm totally on board with what it is that you're putting down. Or I guess I
Yeah.
should say I'm picking up with what you're putting down.
And when you think of like where he's living, like he's living in the house where like his son disappeared from, and it's just like empty and sad reminders, like he's in a living hell when she meets him too. So
Yeah. And then
I
with all
feel
the
like,
fire imagery and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I feel
We're
like there's more traction there than I would have initially thought. But I'm glad that we're able to talk it all the way through, because that was like at the top of my notes early, and I was like, maybe I'll bring it up, but we'll see how things go.
I like that. I like that for sure. Another thing that we didn't talk about too much, another sort of like beat that, I guess not beat, but something that we come back to over and over again in the movie is just like scenes within bathrooms. There's a lot of stuff that happens within bathrooms. I don't think it's as like explicit as something like Moonlight, but um a lot of very important things happen in bathrooms. A lot of the stuff in terms of like their bodies and looking into mirrors and certain things happening to their bodies, or like transformations happening to their bodies, are like done within bathrooms. That's kind of all that I had there, but it is just another, like maybe not thematic element, but sort of like motif that comes up throughout the film.
No, I think you're onto something there because if you look at horror movies throughout history, like how many times has there been like a bathtub or a shower murder, right? And I
Hmm.
think the implication there is that like the shower and the bathtub are places where you're very vulnerable, but like the assumption that you're going to be safe, right? And so when we look at a bathroom, it's like you're usually in the bathroom by yourself. There's almost always a mirror in there. And that's probably the place where you get ready and you actually observe yourself in the mirror more than any other place. So it is a place of like introspection and self reflection. And so by framing a lot of these scenes in there, some with like direct contact with the mirror, some with like that the trifold mirror like highlighting different parts of the scene. We see the mirror in the car too, showing like the corner of Alexia's face at one point. So
Hmm.
just sort of what a mirror represents and sort of like the idea of a shadow self and how that plays into like how we put ourselves out into the world. Like when you're going to get ready for the world, you check yourself in the mirror, you make sure your hair is good.
And now a seamless transition. Um, okay, before we get into recommendations, Nick, I feel like one thing that we haven't talked about that we probably should touch on is the actual ending. Like we said on the front end, like we've gotten into spoilers in this conversation, so now we're gonna just spoil the ending. But there is a lot that's happening there in terms of like wrapping up the entire movie. So I am curious to hear just like what you thought about the ending and how things all wrap up.
I mean, that whole like lead up to the actual birth is pretty gnarly, from stumbling out of the fire truck to the stomach beginning to tear, and you can like see
Hmm.
the chrome underneath, and just like the weakness in her body, and like it all kind of comes to a head in a weird way, in that she goes and finds Vincent, who has just recently drunkenly decided to see what happens if he lights his shirt on fire. Uh, and he's
Another
able
thing
to,
that
right?
we've all done.
Yeah, you know, you're depressed, you spit up some booze on yourself, and you're like, let's see how well it burns. And you know, he puts it out, but you do see that he's got like a burn on his stomach by the time that she comes into the room. But he's fully naked in bed, I think, at that point. She's fully naked coming into the bed, and she lays on him with her head on his stomach. And for a moment it's like, okay, this just sort of feels like safe. And
Hmm.
then I think the lack of understanding and like relationship texture that Alexia has at this point in her life, it's like, oh well, now that he knows I'm a woman, sort of like the way that I've communicated in the past as a female is sexually, so let me like try to get him to help me by doing the thing that I think is supposed to happen.
Hmm.
And like Vincent at first is like, he's freaked out, he's like about to let it happen, and then jumps out of the bed like, no, 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 this is fucked up. Like this is too far. Finally, out of
Yeah.
everything that has happened, this is too far. And he's about to leave, and then she's on her knees in the bed like, just please, like I need your help. Or I think she's laying on her side at that point, but then she gets up
Yeah.
and she's on all fours and just is like puking up like motor oil all over the bed. And you could see the caretaker and Vincent's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
in for a penny, in for a pound,
Yeah.
and let's get this baby out of you. And even then, it's like sort of like manhandling her on the bed, and he's like, "You're gonna get in this posture." He's like, "Okay, push." Like they're interlocking arms in a way that's like you get as much leverage as you could possibly ask for to
Yeah.
push. and like he's very committed to seeing the baby brought to life here. And I was reading some stuff about like the religious allegory that's kind of like floating around through this, and that Alexia is both a Jesus and a Mary figure, and Vincent actually refers to who he thinks is Adrian in front of
Yeah.
the people at the fire company. He's like, no, this is Jesus and I am God. So there's this quiet religious undertone to it. And
Hmm.
in this scene, it's like it's not immaculate conception because she had sex with the car, but for all intents and purposes, like we don't understand that to be functioning. So you could take it as yeah, a version of immaculate conception. Then like she's giving birth to this new creature that has melded the piece of inorganic material that was part of her life
Hmm.
into now like an organic being. So the way that I read about it was that now you see like a fully integrated being that has the metal now like in the spine, and it is one functioning thing versus it being a foreign object in the past when it was just the
Yeah.
plate that was screwed into her head. So I kind of
Yeah.
like the imagery that goes along with that. I think it raises some questions like right at the end of the movie that it's not interested in answering, but I love that, through all of that pain, through all that suffering, through all the blood and the agony, Vincent stays and is now gonna take care of that baby.
Yeah. What's the last line of the movie? I'm here. That's
Hmm.
which is at the end of the day, that's kind of all any of us want to hear from just, someone, usually from a parent or maybe a partner or from a child or, just a friend or loved one. Like we want someone to just be there for us. And Vincent, through all of it, all of the absurdity, not just in this person pretending to be his son, but also this person giving birth to a like half human, half machine baby. He's just like, screw it, F it, we ball. Like, let's do it. Let's let's go with it. And that's again to me, like obviously it's all summed up in that last line, but like that's the whole point of the movie. Is just we are all these like lost souls looking for people to like love us and for us to like give our love to. And sometimes that desire is so deep, we will share that love with a half car, half baby robot machine thing.
Yeah, and even on like the surface of it being like kind of as insane as it is, you think back to the beginning of the movie, and it is this little girl who just like is at odds with her father in the car, like every bit of the way.
Hmm.
She who cares? Like it's like maybe she's being presented as like autistic or on the spectrum or something because she's like making the car noises with it, and the dad's just trying to drown it out. Ignore her, ignore her. So he finally silences her, and she's like still trying to get the attention by kicking the seat. They get into the car accident. She gets hurt, and then the implant goes into her head. And so to then like that's our takeoff point, and then we land at a place where now we have this child who is coming out like integrated as both metal
Hmm.
and flesh, and you have the father there who, despite how insane it is just like, I'm here. And so it's like you're closing that loop as well at the end. So I there's a nice bit of like symmetry on both halves of this film, and I think it's really something.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I'm very happy that it's in the canon.
Me
Nick, I'm
too.
very happy that you joined to talk about this movie. I feel like this has
Me
been
too.
an extremely thrilling, enlightening conversation about a absolutely like wild movie. If you are still listening and you have not seen Titane, please go watch. I hope if you're someone who hadn't seen it and you started listening, you were like, I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna go watch the movie and finish the conversation. Um, but yeah, if you have seen it, go watch it again. It's great. It's one of the best movies of the 21st century of the last 10 years. Definitely will go down as one of the best movies of the 2020s. An absolutely like really 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 special film that exists. So thanks again. I
Yeah,
feel
well
like
well
we
said, man.
I feel like we crushed it, which means it's time for a little bit of fun. We can do some
Sweet.
recommendations
Nice.
for this movie. So, in case there's anyone out there listening who hasn't checked us out before, for each movie that we introduce into the canon, we also recommend 3 things per host and guest host to check out if you like said movie. Of those 3 recommendations, at least one has to be another movie, but the other 2 can be any and everything else. It could be a book or a TV show or a video game or an album or like a painting. Someone has done a recipe before. We like to get really,
Ooh,
you know,
I didn't think that
creative.
far outside the box.
Yeah, we like to get real outside the box with some of the recommendations. Um, it's got to be 3 and only 3, and any movies that we recommend can't be movies that are already in the canon, which unfortunately means, well, maybe fortunately, it means all Fast and Furious movies are on the table. So that's good
Sweet.
news for us.
Yeah. Well, shameless plug for Tokyo Drift. That's not one of my recommendations, but because you came on my show and we talked about it, I'm going to find a way to just like shoehorn it into some month because I have like themes lined up, but it doesn't really fit any of those. So I'm just going to cram it in there on a week where I know that I have time to edit that episode. Um, I had sworn that I was reading a comic that reminded me of this, but I couldn't think of the name of it. So I was like, all right, I'll just go with movies. And we had talked about a couple already that were sort of informative in my experience and I think connected me to this movie a little bit differently, but I'm going to not include those as the Rex. So the first one I'm going to do is Rubber from 2010.
I don't know if I know that one.
uh, Quinton Dupieux in French as well. Um,
Nice.
Total weirdo. That is a movie about a telekinetic tire that has a crush on a girl and does a bunch of killing. So
Awesome.
it's like the opposite of this movie, and
Yeah.
it's completely like a dark comedy. So it's super super weird. But I love his style and his sense of humor. So I figured like sticking with the car motif, we'll start there.
Yeah. Hell
Um,
yeah.
the other one that was immediately like in consideration was Carlo Mirabella Davis's Swallow. I think that was
Okay.
like a 17 or 18 movie,
Hmm.
and Haley Bennett's in the lead, and she is like a young kind of stay-at-home housewife, and sort of the anxiety and pressure of her existence, which she does not like, is leading her like down a dangerous road of, I think the disease is called pica, where you like eat weird objects. So it's like thumbtacks and nails and screws, like a bunch of weird household objects, but how she discovers herself through the process of like struggling with this.
Hmm.
And I really like that one a lot. And then I'm pivoting. I had one lined up for 3, but I'm going a different direction after this conversation. I'm going with Annette from 2020
Nice.
because I love that
Nice. Nice.
movie.
Nice.
It's
Nice.
weird as hell. Leo Carax, French again.
Yeah.
And it's just like dedicated vision, and it's gonna be off-putting for a lot of people. I mean, have you seen Annette?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
okay. So weird. You mentioned seeing faces in movies,
Yeah.
and our good friend Felicia, who was on
Hmm.
the show last week to talk Night of the Hunter, and there was also an Annette reference in that
Ooh,
episode.
nice. Way to go,
So
Felicia.
this might be the even though it is a space that is like oversaturated, this might be the only movie podcast to ever reference Annette in back-to-back episodes.
That's fantastic. When we did 2020's month for Film Club, a friend was like, "So what are all like the good new movies like from the last few
Yeah.
years?" And I was like, "All right, let's do this." And so Annette was my pick for that because somebody else had put Titane on there, and I was like, "All right, I don't want
Mhm.
to load the deck, so let me space it out." And Annette got picked, so we got to have a really good conversation. And another friend who's a big Adam Driver fan had not seen it, and I was like, "There's a scene where he's performing oral sex." and stops because it's a musical to like sing his dialogue. So I was like, what other movie are you going to get that plus like a little freakish talking doll that flies and has a weird singing voice?
Yeah,
So,
that's that's amazing. I absolutely love that pick. Um, believe it or not, in my recommendations, there is going to be another Adam Driver movie about parenthood,
oh,
but I'm
cool.
going to save that for last. But I love all those recommendations. I'm going to have to check out the first two, but I do very much so dig um, Annette as a choice. So for my first one, I'm going to go with a list on Letterboxd, and it's one of the first lists that you see pop up when you like click on this movie. So I'm going to give a shout out to the user who's just known as N, but shout out to you for
Oops,
making the
not me.
list called She's Having Sex with What?
Oh,
And you can only imagine that it features a bunch of movies where people are having sex with various living or inanimate objects that aren't things that we think that people should be having sex with, but there are cool movies um, about them, and Titane is one of them. So
nice.
check out that list if you want. Just like I'm kind of cheating by recommending a lot of movies, but
Yeah.
I just thought that the title of that list was great. So
No, that is great. I'm going to check out that list, and all the rest
shout
of
out
you
to that.
perverts listening should do it too.
Hell yeah. My second recommendation, the one of the dance scenes that we spoke about, um, features a song from Future Islands, which they're a great band. They're like these like journeyman musicians who have been working for years, and I they make a lot of really cool music. I'm not like the biggest Future Islands fan, but the album that song Lighthouse is on that they're dancing to is pretty good. It's called Singles. You've maybe heard some other songs on that album. So Future Islands, if you like that scene, like I think you would people would dig, the rest of what's going um on that album in particular. And then from there you
Cool.
can branch out to
Cool.
some of their other stuff. I've actually been on a mini Future Islands kick since watching this movie the other day. So
Let's
that's been
get it.
fun. And then my last recommendation is my movie. Like I teased, it's another movie that features Adam Driver and is about fatherhood and cars and sex and sensuality and a little bit of violence. Talking Michael Mann's Ferrari.
Ooh, it's a sleeper. I'm surprised. Like, it was crazy. Like, there was so much love for Michael Mann all of a sudden, like a couple of months after Ferrari came out. And I was like, damn, where was all this when this movie was bombing at the box office?
Yeah, I it's not my favorite Michael Mann movie, but um I dug it for sure, and it's just, we kind of I don't know if we spoke about this offline or on the actual episode, but it's very funny that the two conversations that we've had on mic are about movies where people have this like deep love for cars, and we're both not car guys at all.
Yeah.
But between Tokyo Drift and Titan, there is a deep love for cars. Maybe in a totally different way. The dude in Tokyo Drift is not necessarily having sex with his car that we know of, but the love the love is still there. Nick, thank you again so much for joining. Before we get out of here, why don't you let all of these lovely folks know where they can find bad movies we love, or if they just want to, talk to you or follow you for your thoughts on various movies.
Okay, let me try and do all this in one breath. Yeah, my handle most places is Nick Sheisty, Sheisty. It was just like a nickname from high school, and then
Hmm.
anytime I needed a username for something, it was never taken. So I'm just like, I'm never changing this because it's
Yeah,
always available. So that
it's
just
a great
became,
name.
yeah, it just became my thing. And yeah, I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky and X with all that. My main show that I first started was the Sheist podcast, and that was really like an interview based show that then pivoted into talking about some sports, and now is mostly like an incubation space for me to try out things without maybe having to start an entire new idea. And so right now we do This Week at the Movies, where my wife and I get together at the end of every week and we talk about the things that we saw, both like on the couch and in theaters that are new. Sometimes I go to the movies by myself and we'll fold those in there and we kind of preview what's on deck for the weekend. We end up talking about like the industry stuff a lot. We talked a lot about
Mm-hmm.
the whether or not they should have kissed at the end of Twisters in the last one, and I pitched a
Yeah.
whole like sexy Twisters sequel. So that's been a lot of fun.
Maybe they have sex with the Twisters.
Look, man, I mean that's Twisters 3. Don't get ahead of ourselves now. But my wife and I had been wanting to work on something together, and so that was sort of like our practice space. And so today I was finally able to go live with hers, his, and ours, and that's hours spelled like time. Uh, and it's a TV show podcast where we're going to share our favorite TV shows from our lives with one another, and we're just going to go episode by episode and watch them all. And we're going to sort of like release like little episode bundles. So we're starting with her pick of Brothers and Sisters, which was I think like an ABC show from 2006. Callista Flockhart is the lead actress, so we're starting there. We're gonna do some mini series probably along the way too. We're gonna do sort of a companion show to This Week at the Movies. We're gonna do This Week on the Couch, and we'll talk about the TV shows that we were watching, because we're watching Paradise and Severance, and we just caught up with Shrinking and some stuff. So it's a way for her to like come into my podcast space with something that she loves and to like bring me along on that journey. So I got to make sure that the shows that I pick are worthwhile. So we're gonna do like
Mm-hmm.
legacy HBO stuff probably for me, because she never watched that stuff. Uh, so
Nice.
bad, and then we've got of course Bad Movies We Love, which has become like the show of the network. Is like that's the crown jewel now because it has most of my attention and effort, and it's a lot of fun. So that has some new sub series launching as well. That has Baimon Sci-Fi Con, which twice a month I'm getting together with my new co-host Stephanie, and we're going to do sci-fi exclusive movies. My wife is going to come in and do a series with me called Rom-Comathon, where she's going to just
Nice.
drown me in rom-coms. And then we also have Bad Movie Futures, which is a really fun way for me to be able to talk about new movies. So imagine a movie like A Stock, right? And so
Yeah.
the one that we started with was Joker 2. Is this movie's value going to increase or decrease over time? We sort of talk about its projection and what its potential is in the long run. And it's much more informal than my show
Yeah.
typically is, where I have like lots of segments with lots of sound bites and lots of editing. And I was like, I want to get away from doing all that. So those are the 3 sub-series that are out now on Bad Movies We Love. And then there's some other stuff that's in the works and not quite finalized yet. So I'm not going to Adrian Brody us to death here, and I'll just cut it off right now.
Amazing. All amazing stuff. Um, I've only listened to Bad Movies We Love, but I can only imagine that the other shows are also great. So I'm excited to check those out. Again, if you're not, if you don't have Bad Movies We Love in your current rotation, would highly recommend adding it there. Definitely give Nick a follow on the socials. A lot of fun talking with him about movies that we love, both bad and good, and everything in between. This has been an absolute blast. Thank you for listening. If anyone is interested in what is coming up on ScreenAge Wasteland or what is out currently on ScreenAge Wasteland, we recently did a list of the worst Best Picture nominations from the 21st century, which was a ton of fun and took years off my life watching some of the movies on that list. So definitely check that out. By the time this is out, I may or may not have a unofficial awards list on the website. We have our Saw Awards that came out earlier this week, or over the weekend. So check those out. But we also might have some more unofficial awards from me, from your boy Raph. So check that out too. Obviously, we have the Canon new episodes every Wednesday. You might be checking us out on our YouTube page, which means that you get to see my Nosferatu hoodie, which I love. It's very cozy and comfortable, and you should go buy one from the Synagogue. Great movie account on Instagram and Twitter. All random asides, but we will be back next week with another essential movie. We're going to be talking The Raid. Should be very fun. The one and only Sailor Monsoon is making his grand return to the canon, so we're excited to have him back to talk about that. We will see you there, and as always, ScreenAgers, in the meantime, I will see all of you in the wasteland.